The abandoned alien city stretched across the valley, its once great towers now broken and covered in thick vines. Daniel Carter, a human explorer, stepped carefully over the cracked pavement. His boots crunched against the dust of a civilization long forgotten. The air smelled old, like rainwater trapped in stone, and the silence was almost unnatural. His ship had detected strange energy readings from this place. The rest of the galaxy believed this planet was dead. No life, no history, nothing of importance. But Daniel wasn't convinced. Something about this place felt wrong. It was as if the city itself was waiting for something or someone. As he moved deeper into the ruins, he noticed strange symbols carved into the walls. They looked ancient, but something about them felt recent, as if someone had tried to keep them visible. A cold breeze whispered through the ruins, sending chills down his spine. Then he heard it, a faint voice, soft, weak. Daniel froze, his hand hovering over the sidearm at his belt. No life signs had been detected. Was it the wind, a recording, or something else? He turned a corner and found himself standing in what must have once been a grand plaza. In the center was a stone platform, cracked and weathered by time. And at the very edge of the platform, sitting with her back against a broken pillar, was her. A woman. She wasn't human. Her skin was a deep shade of violet, her long silver hair tangled and dull. Her clothes were tattered, barely holding together. And her eyes, faintly glowing golden and filled with something Daniel had never seen before. She was looking at him. A lump formed in his throat. He had seen many alien species before, but this was different. There was no fear in her expression, no curiosity, only shock. You? Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking took great effort. You can see me. Daniel's brow furrowed. Of course I can. Who are you? The alien woman stared at him for a long moment. Then something changed in her expression. A deep sadness, mixed with something almost like relief. She took a shaky breath. Her lips trembled as she whispered words that made Daniel's heart stop. Everyone forgot me, but you remembered me, human. A heavy silence followed. Daniel had no idea who she was. No one had mentioned survivors. No record spoke of this place ever having people left behind. But somehow, this woman, this forgotten soul, believed that he had remembered her. And something told him he couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Not ever. Daniel stood frozen, his heart pounding. The alien woman's golden eyes held something strange, something lonely. Her voice, weak yet full of emotion, echoed in his mind. Everyone forgot me, but you remembered me, human. But he hadn't remembered her. He had never seen her before, and yet those words felt heavy, as if they carried the weight of an entire civilization's sorrow. Slowly, he stepped closer. The woman didn't move, didn't flinch. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. What do you mean? He asked cautiously. Who are you? She looked down at her hands, thin and shaking. Her violet skin had lost its shine, as if she was fading from existence itself. My name is Lariah, she whispered. I am, or was, the last of my kind. Daniel's brows furrowed. That didn't make sense. There were no records of this planet ever having a living civilization. No one in the galaxy spoke of the species that had once lived here. It was as if they had been completely erased from history. Lariah slowly lifted her head, her golden eyes locking onto his. My people are gone, human, she said, her voice shaking. Not just dead, forgotten. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. Forgotten. That was impossible. Even extinct civilizations left behind some trace. Artifacts, data, ruins that told their story. But if what she was saying was true, then something far more terrible had happened here. I don't understand, he admitted. How can an entire species just disappear? Lariah's fingers curled into fists. Because someone wanted it that way. Silence stretched between them. The wind howled through the ruins, as if whispering a warning. Daniel swallowed, trying to process what she was saying. She continued. A long time ago, my people thrived. We had cities, knowledge, dreams, but we were seen as a threat. She paused, her voice almost breaking. And so, they erased us. Not just our bodies, not just our cities. They erased our existence from memory, from records, from history. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. He had heard of wars, of planets being destroyed. But this, a forced erasure from existence. It was terrifying. But if that's true, he said carefully, why are you still here? Luriah hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. I should have faded with the rest of them. But someone, kept me here. Daniel took a deep breath. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to not get involved. But as he looked at Luriah, at the pain in her eyes, the way she clung to the last thread of her existence, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't turn away. Not now. Not when she had no one else left. Daniel sat on a broken stone pillar, his mind racing. Luriah's words haunted him. Her people weren't just dead. They had been erased, removed from history, as if they had never existed. And yet here she was, a living memory. He glanced at her. Luriah sat with her arms wrapped around herself, her golden eyes staring into the distance. She looked tired, like someone who had been fighting an invisible battle for far too long. You said someone kept you here, Daniel finally spoke. Who? Luriah shook her head slowly. I don't know. Maybe it was you. Daniel stiffened. Me? That's impossible. I've never been here before. Luriah let out a sad chuckle. Maybe not. But you're the first to see me. The first to remember. That means something. Daniel exhaled. This didn't make sense. He wasn't special. He was just an explorer, a man searching for knowledge. Yet, for some reason, Luriah existed in a world where she shouldn't. And if she was telling the truth, then whoever erased her people had failed. We need answers, he said, standing up. Is there any place here that could tell us what happened? Luriah hesitated. Then she nodded. The archives, she whispered. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. An archive meant records, data, proof that her people were real. But there was hesitation in Luriah's voice. What's the catch? He asked. She turned her gaze to him, her expression unreadable. The archives are sealed, she said, hidden deep beneath the city. Daniel's gut twisted. And Luriah sighed. And something guards it. A silence fell between them. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying whispers of the past. Daniel squared his shoulders. He had come too far to back down now. Then we'll deal with it, he said firmly. Take me there. Luriah's eyes widened slightly. She seemed surprised by his determination. But slowly she nodded. Without another word, she stood up and led him toward the heart of the ruins. As they walked, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Something in the air felt wrong. The shadows stretched unnaturally long. The ruins seemed to shift when he wasn't looking. And in the far distance, beneath the city's foundation, something stirred. Daniel followed Luriah through the winding, broken streets of the alien city. The once grand buildings were now little more than crumbling skeletons, their foundations cracked and weakened by time. Yet despite the devastation, there was a strange beauty in the ruins. The faded murals on the walls spoke of a lost civilization, a civilization that had once dreamed of a future that now seemed impossible. Luriah moved silently, her steps light despite her frail condition. Daniel couldn't help but admire her strength. She had survived a fate worse than death. Her people hadn't just been destroyed. They had been erased. Yet here she was, a living, breathing testament to what had once been. They reached the heart of the city, where the ruins seemed to grow more dense and complicated. There, at the center of it all, stood a massive structure, an ancient temple or archive, its doors sealed shut with glowing symbols Daniel couldn't read. The air around it hummed with strange energy. "This is it," Larea said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The archives." Daniel stepped closer to the door, examining the symbols. They pulsed with a faint light, as if alive. He felt an instinctive pull toward them, but he knew better than to touch anything without understanding it. "What do we do?" he asked. Larea studied the door, her golden eyes narrowing. "There's a code," she said, "but it's ancient. Only my people knew it." She paused. "And I've forgotten most of it." Daniel glanced at her, surprised. "You don't remember?" She lowered her gaze, a look of guilt flashing across her face. "I was a child when everything happened. When they erased us, I don't remember everything about the archives." She shook her head slowly. "But I know this. The code is the key to opening the doors." Daniel felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He had come this far, and now they were stuck. But he wouldn't give up now, not when they were so close. He turned to Larea, his voice firm. "We'll figure it out," he said. "You may not remember the whole code, but you remember some of it, right?" "That's enough to start." Larea hesitated, then nodded. "I remember a few phrases, words that my people used. I'll try." Together, they began to work. Larea stood in front of the door, her hands trembling as she muttered words under her breath, words Daniel couldn't understand. The symbols on the door flickered, responding to her voice. Daniel watched closely, his heart racing. The tension in the air was thick, like something was about to happen. Then, with a sudden, sharp click, the door began to open. The sound echoed through the ruins like a distant thunderclap. Larea took a step back, her eyes wide. "It worked. You helped me remember." Daniel smiled. "We did it together." The massive door slid open, revealing the darkness inside. The archives were hidden in the depths of the structure, untouched by time. The answers to the mystery of Larea's people were waiting for them inside. But as they stepped forward, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was watching them. Something else was inside the archives, and it was ready to make its presence known. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit passage leading into the heart of the ancient archive. The air inside was cool and stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in centuries. Dust floated in the air, settling on the forgotten shelves that lined the walls. Despite the eerie stillness, there was something almost alive about the space, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Larea stepped cautiously into the darkness, her golden eyes scanning the surroundings. "This is it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The records of my people." Daniel followed close behind, his hand resting on the weapon at his side, just in case. The silence was oppressive, and every step felt like it echoed in the still air. The only sound was the soft shuffle of their footsteps on the stone floor. They moved deeper into the archive, passing rows of strange alien symbols etched into the walls, some glowing faintly, others barely visible beneath layers of dust. At the far end of the room, a large console stood, its surface cracked but still functional. It looked like the heart of the archive, where all the records were stored. "Over there," Larea said, pointing to the console. "That's where the data is." Daniel nodded, his mind racing. They were so close now, so close to uncovering the truth. But as he stepped toward the console, something shifted in the shadows. A low, mechanical hum filled the air. Daniel froze, his hand instinctively gripping his weapon. Larea's expression hardened, and she stepped back. "It's here," she murmured. Before Daniel could react, a sudden clang echoed through the room. A hulking, armored figure emerged from the darkness. It was a massive robot, its joints creaking as it moved toward them. The creature's red eyes glowed, scanning the two intruders with an intelligence that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. Larea's voice trembled. "It's the Guardian, the one who protects the archives. It's never let anyone leave." Daniel took a step forward, his heart pounding. He knew they had to get to the console, but the Guardian was blocking their way. "Can you disable it?" he asked. Luraya shook her head. "No, it's linked to the archives. I can't control it." The robot's eyes narrowed, and its mechanical voice boomed through the silence. "Intruders detected. Termination sequence activated." Without warning, it lunged forward, its massive arm swinging toward Daniel. He barely had time to react, diving to the side just as the robot's fist crashed into the ground where he had been standing moments before. The impact sent a shockwave through the room, causing the walls to tremble. Luraya scrambled back, fear flashing in her eyes. Daniel quickly regained his footing, his mind racing for a solution. The robot was fast, far faster than he had expected. He couldn't fight it head-on. It was too strong. But he wasn't going to give up. "Luraya," he shouted, his voice urgent. "Get to the console. I'll hold it off." Luraya hesitated, fear written across her face, but she nodded. "Hurry." As she dashed toward the console, Daniel took a deep breath and sprinted toward the Guardian. He needed to buy her time. Time to access the records that could reveal the truth about her people. The robot turned to face him, its eyes glowing brighter. Daniel readied himself for the fight of his life. The shadows grew deeper, and the room seemed to close in on him. He had to survive. The battle with the Guardian was fierce. Daniel dodged another swing of its massive arm, barely managing to duck in time. The metallic clang of the robot's fists smashing against the stone walls echoed through the archive. Each strike was enough to shake the ground beneath him. His heart raced, and sweat beaded on his forehead as he focused on staying one step ahead of the machine. His eyes darted to Luraya, who was desperately trying to access the console. She was whispering to it, muttering words Daniel couldn't understand. The data she needed was close, but the Guardian wasn't going to make this easy. The robot stepped forward again, its red eyes narrowing as it locked onto Daniel. It raised its arm high, ready to strike again. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. There was no way he could outrun it forever. He had to think quickly. He noticed the massive data cables running from the Guardian's back, feeding directly into the walls of the archive. If he could cut those cables, maybe he could disrupt its control system. Maybe he could slow it down long enough for Luraya to get the information. With a surge of determination, Daniel rushed forward, aiming for the cables. The robot turned toward him just in time, its mechanical arm swinging down toward him. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the blow. In one fluid motion, he pulled his knife from his belt and slashed at the nearest cable. Sparks flew as the metal groaned, but the cable didn't snap. He swung again, harder this time, aiming for the vulnerable spot where the wires were exposed. This time, the cable broke, and the robot jerked back, a strange hiss escaping its metal frame. The lights in its eyes flickered for a moment, and it paused. Daniel's heart pounded. Was it working? Luraya glanced over her shoulder, her eyes wide with fear. "Hurry," she urged. "I can almost get the records." The Guardian seemed to recover quickly, its eyes glowing brighter again as it locked onto Daniel. But its movements were slower now, less fluid. The cables weren't feeding it energy anymore, and it was losing power. Daniel didn't hesitate. He took advantage of the robot's weakened state, ducking under its remaining attacks and slashing at the cables again. Sparks flew from the cuts, and the machine's movements grew more erratic. Luraya's voice reached him through the chaos. "I've got it," she shouted. Daniel spun around to see her standing triumphantly at the console, her hands pressing a sequence of buttons. The archive hummed, and the walls lit up with streams of data. The air buzzed with energy as the truth of her people's history began to unfold. But Luraya's expression changed, her face pale. The light in her eyes flickered, and she swayed on her feet. "Luraya," Daniel shouted, his focus shifting from the battle to her. She staggered, her body trembling. I can feel it," she whispered. "I'm fading, Daniel. I'm starting to disappear." Daniel's stomach dropped. He rushed to her side, catching her as she collapsed into his arms. "No, no, don't say that," he said, panic rising in his chest. "You can't fade. Not now. We have the truth. You're real." Loraya smiled weakly, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm fading because I was never meant to exist, Daniel. I was never meant to be remembered. I can feel it. My soul was tied to my people's memory. And now, that memory is returning." Daniel felt helpless, his mind racing for a solution. "There has to be a way to save you. We can." But she stopped him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "No, Daniel. You've already done more for me than anyone else ever has. You remembered me. You gave me back my life. And that's all I ever wanted." With those words, she closed her eyes. Daniel's heart shattered. He held her close, refusing to let go. She couldn't disappear. She couldn't be lost again. But as he held her, something deep inside him told him that this wasn't the end. Loraya had found him, and he would find a way to keep her memory alive, no matter the cost. Daniel's hands shook as he held Loraya in his arms. The dim glow of the console illuminated her pale face, her golden eyes barely open. Her body felt too light, as if her very essence was slipping away with each passing moment. "No," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "You can't fade. Not like this." Her lips curled into a faint smile, though it was clear how much energy it took for her to even try. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't want to bring this burden to you. But you remembered me, human. You gave me something no one else could. My existence, it was always fragile, but now it feels complete." Tears stung Daniel's eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He wasn't going to lose her. Not after everything they had been through. The console's lights flickered as the data continued to pour out, the truth of her people's history now open for anyone to see. The archives were alive with information, but Loraya's fading body was a stark contrast to the streams of data. Daniel couldn't help but feel the weight of the irony. She was the last living person of her kind, and yet now she might be lost forever. "No," Daniel repeated, his voice more forceful this time. "There has to be something I can do. We can fix this. We can." Loraya placed a weak hand on his arm, stopping him. "There's nothing more you can do. It was never about fixing me. It was about remembering." Daniel shook his head. "You're wrong. It's about more than that. You matter, Loraya. You're not just some memory to be lost. Your people, your story, it matters. I won't let it fade." She smiled again, though it was faint. "You already saved me, Daniel. You remembered me. And in the end, that's all I ever wanted, to be seen, to be remembered." But Daniel couldn't accept that. He didn't understand how he could just let her go. He didn't want to let go of her, not when there was still so much to learn, so much to discover about her people's history. Looking at the archive, he suddenly had an idea. It was a long shot, a risk, but what choice did he have? "Wait here," he said to Loraya, his voice filled with sudden urgency. He stood up and rushed to the console. Loraya's voice, though faint, reached him. "What are you doing?" "I don't know if this will work," Daniel said, his mind racing. "But I remember you telling me that your people's memories were tied to the archive. If I can access it, maybe I can find a way to stabilize your existence. Maybe, just maybe, I can bring you back." Loraya's eyes fluttered as she tried to sit up, but her body was too weak. "Daniel, be careful." He didn't respond. His focus was on the console now. The glowing symbols, the endless data pouring out. He searched frantically, scanning through the information for anything that might offer a clue. And then he found it. A single line of code, buried deep within the data. It spoke of a memory stabilization procedure, a method his people had once used to preserve the minds and souls of their greatest leaders, a memory anchoring technique that might hold the key to saving Loraya. His fingers flew over the console's interface, entering the code with precision. The archive responded almost immediately, its energy surging through the room. The hum of the machinery grew louder, and the walls seemed to pulse with life. Then the room fell silent. Laraya's body was still, her eyes closed, and for a moment Daniel thought he had failed. But then something changed. Laraya's form began to glow faintly, and a soft warmth spread from her body. It was subtle at first, but it grew stronger with each passing second. Laraya gasped, her golden eyes fluttering open. She was alive. "I'm here," she whispered, looking up at Daniel, her voice full of awe. Daniel's heart raced. "You're here. You're real." Laraya smiled, a full, genuine smile. "You remembered me, Daniel, and that memory brought me back." The room was quiet again, but this time it felt different, as if the weight of an entire lost history had been lifted. Daniel stood beside her, his heart swelling with relief. They weren't done yet. There was still much to discover about her people and their history. But for now, he had done what no one else had been able to do. He had brought her back. And that was enough. The light in the archive flickered and hummed, its ancient walls now alive with the memory of Laraya's people. Daniel stood beside her, watching in awe as the energy from the console continued to pulse around them. There was a sense of calm now, a stillness that felt right. Laraya's golden eyes, once dim and fading, now shone with life again. She smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. It wasn't the weak, tired smile from before. It was the smile of someone who had just been given a second chance. "Daniel." Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper, but full of emotion. "I'm really here. I'm not fading." He nodded, his heart still racing. "You're here. I can't believe it worked." "I can't either," she said, looking around at the archive. "I don't know how, but I'm alive. And the history of my people is alive with me. We'll find out what happened to them. We'll learn the truth." Daniel's mind was still processing everything. He had come here for answers, for knowledge, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected her. She had been lost, forgotten, erased from existence, and now she was here, real and full of life. For the first time, the burden of the past didn't seem so heavy. He had thought that the key to understanding this place lay in the knowledge it held, but now he realized that the real key had always been Laraya. "You're not alone anymore," Daniel said, his voice steady with newfound certainty. "You have me. We'll figure this out together." Laraya's gaze softened as she looked at him. "I thought I would be forgotten forever, that no one would remember. But you did. You saw me. You gave me something I never thought I'd have again." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling. "You matter, Laraya. Your people matter. Their story deserves to be heard." For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling between them. Laraya was no longer a forgotten soul lost in the dust of time. She was alive, and she had a purpose. "I think," Laraya began slowly, her voice filled with a new sense of purpose. "I think I need to go back. To the people who erased us. I need to know why they did it. I need to know who decided we should be forgotten." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then we'll go. Together. We'll find out what happened." He could see the determination in her eyes. It was the same fire that had once burned in her people's hearts, the same drive that had propelled them forward to greatness. And now it burned again in her, in Laraya. She was no longer the last of her kind, lost and fading. She was the beginning of something new, something bigger than either of them had imagined. "We'll need to leave the archive soon," Daniel said, his voice serious. "The Guardians won't stop. They were built to protect this place, to keep the truth hidden. They'll be coming for us." Laraya nodded. "I know, but we've got the truth now. We've got something they can't take away from us." "Then let's go," Daniel said, taking a step toward the door. Together, they walked out of the archive, into the ruins of a world that had been lost to time. But it wasn't truly lost anymore. They had found it again. They had found each other, and the future was full of possibilities. As they stepped into the open air, the sky above them was clearer than it had ever been. The stars seemed brighter, and for the first time in a long time, the galaxy didn't feel so cold. Luraya turned to Daniel, her golden eyes shining with hope. "Let's begin the journey, Daniel. Let's make sure no one ever forgets again." And with that, they walked forward together, ready to face whatever came next. The journey ahead was unknown, but Daniel and Luraya were ready. With the Archiv's secrets now unlocked, they had the knowledge they needed, but the truth of her people was only part of the puzzle. There was still the matter of why her civilization had been erased. They needed answers, and those answers could only be found in the far reaches of the galaxy. As they left the ruins of the ancient city, the landscape around them grew darker. The wind began to pick up, howling through the cracked buildings like a mournful sigh. But for Daniel and Luraya, the world felt different now. It was no longer just a desolate place. It was a starting point, the beginning of something bigger. "We need to get to my ship," Daniel said, scanning the horizon. "It's the only way we can travel fast enough to find those responsible for what happened to your people." Luraya nodded, her eyes filled with determination. Her energy was stronger now, the fading weakness that had haunted her body dissipating with each step. She was no longer the fragile soul who had once feared she would disappear forever. With Daniel by her side, she had purpose again. As they approached the ship, Luraya stopped for a moment, looking at the sky above them. The stars were still visible, distant and cold, but for the first time, they seemed a little closer. Maybe it was the hope she felt, or the realization that she wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who remembered her, someone who believed in her. "Do you ever wonder why they erased us?" Luraya asked, her voice quieter now. "Why did they want to wipe out our people's history?" Daniel's brow furrowed. "I don't know, but I intend to find out. The people responsible for this, they are the ones who need to answer. Not just for your people, but for everyone who's been forgotten. Your civilization wasn't the only one that suffered like this. There are others." Luraya's gaze turned cold as she looked at him. "Then we'll make sure they can never do this again. No one should have the power to decide who matters and who doesn't." The resolve in her voice was clear, and Daniel felt a surge of pride. Together, they would uncover the truth, no matter how long it took or how dangerous it became. Inside the ship, Daniel made preparations. He checked the systems, ensuring everything was in working order. It had been a while since he had used the ship for more than simple travel, but this time, it would serve as the base for a journey that could change the course of galactic history. Luraya sat quietly in the cockpit, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. For a moment, she was lost in thought. But then she turned to Daniel with a new sense of urgency. "We need to go to the heart of the galaxy," she said. "That's where they're hiding. The ones who erased us. They're powerful, but they can be defeated." Daniel glanced at her. "Then we'll go. And we'll do whatever it takes to make sure your people are never forgotten again." With a final look at the ruined city, Daniel activated the engines. The ship hummed to life, and they began their journey into the unknown. The galaxy was vast, but the truth was waiting for them. And this time, no one could stop them. The ship soared through the dark void of space, its engines humming steadily. Outside, the stars blurred into streaks of light as they traveled faster than ever before. For Daniel and Luraya, the journey to the heart of the galaxy felt like the start of something greater than they had ever imagined. Luraya sat beside Daniel at the helm, her eyes focused on the path ahead, but her thoughts were far away. She had never thought she'd make it this far. She had been on the brink of disappearing, a ghost, forgotten by the universe. But now, not only had she been brought back to life, she had purpose. They were going to uncover the truth about her people, about those who erased them, and stop it from ever happening again. "I keep thinking about how it all started," Luraya said quietly, breaking the silence. "How they decided to wipe us out. It wasn't just a war. It was something far more calculated, something that affected all the forgotten civilizations. Daniel glanced at her, his expression serious. They didn't just destroy your people, Loraya. They erased their entire history. And that's something we can't let stand. We can't let anyone else suffer the way your people did. Loraya nodded, a fire burning in her eyes. We won't let it happen again. Not on my watch. The ship's controls beeped as a new signal appeared on the radar. Daniel's eyes narrowed as he analyzed it. We're getting close, he said. I've tracked down a lead. The ones responsible for erasing your people. They're hidden in the capital of the galaxy. It's heavily guarded, but we can get there. We can find out who they are. Loraya sat up straighter, her body tensing. The capital? It'll be dangerous. We'll be walking right into the heart of their power. We don't have a choice, Daniel replied. We can't hide forever, but we have something they don't. He turned to her with a grin. We have each other. For a moment, Loraya smiled, the warmth of their partnership giving her strength. Daniel was right. They had already overcome so much. This final step, though daunting, was just another challenge they could face together. The ship entered the capital's orbit, the once hidden city now visible through the viewport. It was a sprawling metropolis, its shining towers rising high into the sky, guarded by fleets of ships and automated defenses. It was the center of galactic power and the heart of the mystery. Daniel slowed the ship's approach, careful not to attract attention. The capital's atmosphere felt oppressive, like the weight of the entire galaxy's forgotten stories pressed down on them. But there was no turning back now. We're here, Daniel said, a sense of determination in his voice. Loraya took a deep breath. This is it. The answers are inside. But we have to be careful. Daniel nodded. He had no illusions about what they were about to face. The people who had erased her civilization were powerful, but they wouldn't be able to erase the truth. Not this time. As the ship descended, Loraya's heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. This was the moment. The truth was waiting. And it was up to them to make sure it was never hidden again. They touched down. The city sprawled out before them like a maze of secrets. The final battle for truth had begun, and they were ready. Together, they would uncover the mystery. Together, they would make sure no one was forgotten again. The dawn of a new era had arrived.